What killed the frog? Put a frog into a vessel filled with water and start heating the water. As the temperature of the water begins to rise, the frog adjusts its body temperature accordingly. The frog keeps adjusting its body temperature with the increasing temperature of the water. Just when the water is about to reach boiling point, the frog cannot adjust anymore. At this point, the frog decides to jump out. The frog tries to jump, but it's unable to do so because it has lost all its strength while adjusting with the rising water temperature. Very soon, the frog dies. What killed the frog? Think about it. I know many will say that the boiling water killed the frog. But the truth is, the truth about what killed the frog was its own inability to decide when to jump out of the boiling water. The frog did not jump out before it was too late. Yes. We all need to adjust with people and with situations, but we also need to be sure when we need to simply move on. There are times when we need to face a situation and take appropriate actions. If we allow people to exploit us physically, emotionally, financially, spiritually, and even mentally, they will often continue to do so. And we have to make that decision as to when to jump. Family, let's make that decision to jump while we still have the strength. Amen. Our guest tonight is Tressa Franklin, and oh, what a powerful force she is. Powerful. Her strength verse is Romans 12:2, which reads, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to rest, to test, and approve what God's will is, his good, his pleasing, and perfect will." She will bless us with her story of how she jumped from the fire, when it was time. Tressa, please bless us.
Well, first of all, Rosalind, I got to thank you. And I know you hear this every time you have a guest on, but I just want to thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share my story. I was actually telling the ladies in a Bible class just last week how important it is for us to be okay with sharing our stories, because our stories have a way, we all have a story, we can testify of that story, but a lot of times we don't want to tell our stories. But it's the story that we tell about where we come from and what we've been through that actually makes us more relatable and real to people, because the version of us that we see now is not necessarily who we were back then, And so it's good to be able to communicate with individuals about the things that we've gone through and how God has brought us from then to where we are now. And so, Rosalind invited me to share my story, and I really can appreciate the story of the frog, because I hadn't really connected the dots, but that is definitely it. It's about making decisions, prayerfully being led by the Holy Spirit to make changes in your life, particularly during seasons where you don't really have control over a lot of stuff. So, just telling a little bit about myself. Well, first of all, I am a Christian. I am married and I have beautiful children. And the Lord has brought me a really, really long way, because the version of Tressa that you see today is definitely not the version of Tressa that existed as a younger woman, definitely not as a teenager. And a lot of the things that I have hidden in my heart and in my mind as a result of that transformed thinking and mindset that Roz mentioned from Romans 12:2. They were not part of who I was then, but they are now. And so anyway, I'll just kind of go back from my earliest beginning. I am the youngest of 6 children, born and raised in Dallas area. When I was around 3 years, I was about to say 3 o'clock. When I was around 3 years old, my parents divorced and my stepdad entered into my life. And that was my dad. That was my dad. And he was in the picture from the ages of 3 to 8 when he passed away of a brain tumor. But even in that little short window of my stepdad being in my life, he was a heavy drinker. He was a good provider, but he was also a heavy drinker. And him and my mom would get in physical altercations on a regular basis. She wasn't abused. He was I hate to say it, but kind of a sloppy drunk when he was. So he wasn't really a threat. But I do recall them experience, having fights in the floor, but it was almost a norm for me. One of the things about reflecting and remembering your past, you remember some stuff that you hadn't thought about in a long time. I was like, oh, wow. And I hadn't thought about that in a long time, but still, that was my dad. And again, at the age of 8, he passed away from a brain tumor. And that was my last experience of being in a 2-parent household. So from the time I was 8 years old up into my adult years, of course, my mom raised us as a single parent. Now, my oldest 3 siblings they lived with my grandparents on my dad's side. And so in my household, it was always me and my 2 sisters that were right above me. And I think I had a pretty good preteen years. I think I had a pretty decent life, family holidays, cousins, and playing outside with friends and all of that kind of stuff, And then there was a season where, probably around 12 years old, my grandmother on my father's side passed away, and my grandfather on my mother's side passed away. And my mom was faced with trying to watch after her mom that lived in a town a little bit away, trying to make sure that she's all right. And so one of my sisters lived with her for a little while as a teenager, and then she decided she couldn't deal with it anymore. So she just came on home. And so my mom asked me to go and live with my grandmother. And at the time, growing up with my grandmother, I wouldn't necessarily say she was just a mean person, but she wasn't the nicest person. And she was very vocal about her favorites. She would say that I had 2 siblings in particular. For whatever reason, she always said that they were her favorites. And she would literally say, yeah, I love them more than I love you. Because they're better than you, And so I dealt with a lot of that. So I felt like, why I want to go live with her when she doesn't even like me. And so that's actually what I communicated with my mom. I told my mom when she asked me to go, I said, why would I go live with her? She don't even like me, But at that time I was like, okay, if I go, it would give my mom a peace of mind. And so that's actually why I decided to go. So in the 7th grade, I moved in with my grandmother, and I kind of became like the man of the house, kind of, sort of, because I did all the physical work. My grandmother took care of the household. She did all the cooking and cleaning. Well, not all the cleaning, but I took care of yard work. And actually I spent a lot of time outside. But during these years from 7th grade to 9th grade was probably one of the most, I guess, detrimental seasons in my life, because my grandmother was very verbally and emotionally abusive. She was, my grandmother had my mom when she was 16 years old, first of all, and my mom was the oldest of 3 children. And my grandmother, I believe she only had a sixth grade education, and that may have played a role into some of the things that she would say to me. My grandmother called me stupid all the time. She called me stupid all the time. And most of the time I didn't want to spend time with her. So I spent a lot of time in my room. I read a lot of books. I listened to a lot of music. I spent time outside all the time, but I just wanted to be away from her most of the time. Now, it wasn't bad all the time, but I lived that way for 3 years, and it just progressively got worse because I went from experiencing a household with my siblings and laughter and playmates in my community, in my neighborhood, and friends, to it just being me and my grandmother. And so you can just imagine how culturally shocking that was for me to go from those two extremes. And so what happened in my heart was it propelled me to be depressed, because I dealt with loneliness. It was just me. And the one time that I did have a good friend that I considered my best friend at the time, she came to visit because she lived in my neighborhood. She came to visit. And even that became an issue because instead of me just having a good friend over, my grandmother was like, well, why don't you look like her? Why don't you dress like her? And so I didn't even want my friend around because that became an issue for me. And so, but the thing about it, throughout those three years that I stayed with my grandmother, I would be open about the issues that I was having with my mother. And I wanted my mother, all those years, what I wanted from my mother, because I was trying to make sure that she was okay by being there as a support to my mother and my grandmother. But during those 3 years, I wanted my mom to check my grandmother. I did. I wanted her to step up and protect me and say, you're wrong for the way you're talking to her. Don't do that, But of course, it never happened. And so around maybe in my 9th grade year of high school or 8th grade, I can't remember what year it was. And I'm thankful that I was very ignorant in the how-tos, but on 2 different occasions as a teenager, I did attempt suicide, but I didn't, I'm here, but so the next morning I would wake up and I was like, man, I'm still here. But even when I went to sleep, not expecting to wake up on those 2 different occasions as a teenager, I cried myself to sleep. But it was really, again, about how this would make my mom feel. I did not want my mom to be sad, but I knew that I couldn't stay in the situation that I was in. And so in my 9th grade year, I called my mom once again to, vent to her about some of the things that were going on. My grandmother said, you didn't raise her right. And okay, I told my mom that, and I was hoping once again that she would say, okay, no, I'm coming to get you. But she didn't do it again. And those 3 years, that's what I wanted from my mom the most, was to hear her stand up for me. But she did not do it, not in that aspect. And so on that particular day, I said, I'm ready to come home. So I wanted my mom to rescue me in that moment, but she didn't again. So I said, okay, I got to jump out. I'm like the frog now. But so it was getting hot, and I said, okay, it's time for me to jump ship. I can't deal with this anymore. And so the fact that my grandmother called me stupid all the time, that planted a seed deep in my spirit. And I'll probably say something about that later. But okay, so here I am now. I'm back with my siblings, back in the household with my mom. And, life is decent, but some of the damage had already been done, because even before, well, I don't even think, even before I would move with my grandmother, I dealt with some basic preteen self-esteem issues, but it wasn't anything that just made me feel bad about myself. But after that season in my life, I definitely struggled in feeling good about who I was, okay, because I didn't necessarily have anybody pouring teaching and enlightenment into my spirit as I grew up. And so now I'm away from my grandmother. Then I go to high school in the Dallas area. And in the 10th grade, I started playing basketball, and I got very good very quickly. And by my senior year, I was offered a full year scholarship. I could have went academic or athletic to Langston University. Now, mind you, in my 3 years of being an athlete, I had very little support. Every now and then, one of my brothers would pop up at a game. I didn't even know that he knew that I had a game, but I look up and see him in the audience sometimes. But my mom, she didn't come very often unless she had somebody to come with her. And so most of the time, any victories that I had to celebrate within myself, within my, advancing in basketball, I just had to, it was just about me. And so in my senior year, my biological father passed away. And I actually had a basketball game on that day. I mean, a basketball game on the day that we memorialized him. I went to the funeral. I did not tell any of my classmates, any of my teammates that's why I was late until after I had gotten there. And so that particular day, my entire family showed up to my basketball game, but that was the first time I ever experienced all of my family being there to support me. But it was really not necessarily about me and my basketball journey, but it was about making sure that I was all right as far as losing my biological father, which I really didn't have a relationship with. And so anyway, here it is. I received this basketball scholarship and I go on this trip to Langston University, which is where the scholarship was. And when I was there, I was just so overwhelmed by the isolation of the place. I was like, I don't have support here in Dallas. I'm sure not going to have any support way over here in Langston, Oklahoma. So it was easy for me to say no then because I was afraid of what was out there. So I did not go to college. I did not take that scholarship because I didn't feel like I would have anybody supporting me. Okay. So here I am out of high school now. You know how it is when you get out of high school, you think that just because the world actually tells you this, when you turn 18, apparently turning 18 and graduating high school with a diploma is supposed to make you miraculously mature. And that's not how that works. So I graduated from high school thinking I knew something that I didn't know. And I was standing on a bus stop one day and I met a dude that will become my first love. Okay. I was a pretty good girl in high school and he will become my first love. And not long after that, we had our own apartment together and he was extremely unfaithful to me. First love, when it's your first love, you tolerate a whole bunch of unnecessary stuff if you don't have the strength of the Lord in you, right? And so we got our own place and eventually I moved back with my mother and he was actually being raised by his grandmother. And he moved back with his grandmother, but at that time we found out that we were pregnant. Okay. And so I remember when I told my mom that I was pregnant, I wrote it on a little sticky note. I wrote his name, my name, and then I just put the word baby. Okay. And so when I gave it to my mom, she said, well, I had hoped that you would have been married before you had a baby. And in that moment, I got extremely agitated. I didn't say anything else. But at that point, as far as that journey of me being pregnant and what my mom thought about it, it didn't matter to me because she communicated to me in that moment that I had hoped that you had been married first, but not once in my entire childhood had she had that conversation with me. My mom didn't talk to me about life. My mom didn't talk to me about men or sex or anything in life, And so when she said that, I was like, in my mind, of course I didn't say it to her, but I was like, since when? Since when has this become a standard that you wanted for my life? So anyway, so I go, I'm in the relationship, and when I was 7 months pregnant, I did marry him. And of course, I still dealt with a lot of infidelities and all that kind of stuff. But during the course of this relationship is when I first started going to church consistently, because growing up as a kid, I didn't go to church. We go visit every now and then, but we weren't a church going family. And so when I got with him, I started going to church with him and his grandmother that was raising him. And for the first time in my life, I actually heard God, as opposed to hooping and, the theatrics of what we see sometimes in churches. I actually heard God. And it was actually, I started attending the Marsalis Avenue Church of Christ in Dallas, and Edie Simster was the minister. And on the day that I got baptized, I was 7 months pregnant, and 7 people got baptized that same day. But I made sure that when I went when I went to church that day, I went by myself. I didn't have him with me, and his grandmother wasn't with me, because I didn't want them involved in that journey, that piece of my life, because I didn't believe that they were helpful in that part of my life. And so I made sure, and I had planned it that way. I got married first. And let me say this, because, and I can't really remember, but I tell people that I played Russian roulette with my soul, because I knew that as I was positioned in this church, listening to this preaching, right, I started becoming convicted in what I was hearing. And I knew at this point that I was lost and I needed to be saved, right? And so here I am now, 7 months pregnant, and I'm like, okay, but I'm with this dude that I want to be with, even though the relationship wasn't healthy, but I'm with this dude that I want to be with. So if I get married, that means that God is going to expect me not to fornicate. But if I don't fornicate, he's going to leave me, because that's all we got going on, you know? And so I believe that I got married first. That's what I did. I got married first, and 2 weeks later I did get baptized. But that was my reasoning, and I called it Russian roulette, because I knew what God expected of me, right? And so anyway, 7 months pregnant, I get baptized. And it wasn't until about 2 years into that I actually started really becoming faithful in my walk with the Lord. And thankfully, the right sister scooped me up, Sister Jerry Lacey from the Marsalis Avenue Church of Christ. She was an she is an extremely faithful woman of God. And I'm so glad that she scooped me up as opposed to anybody else, because, you know, if you get scooped up and mentored by the wrong person in your Christian journey, you could get a different result, right? So I'm thankful that she was the one that mentored me so early in my walk with the Lord. And so, of course, soon after, in our relationship with my first husband, my daughter was probably about 3 when we separated and divorced for the last time. And so, well, I didn't divorce him until I was until my daughter Taylor was about 5 years old, but he had since then already moved on and started his second family. And so here I am loving the Lord and serving the Lord, and I'm a good Christian single woman, single mother, you know, and people looked up to me and, you know, pointed at me. Tressa is a really good example of a faithful single woman of God. And I started getting this mindset that God owed me something. I'm such a good Christian, right? And so God owes me something. I mean, all I need now, I'm faithful. I ain't fornicating. I'm not doing any of this stuff. And so now the only thing left, and I said it like this to the Lord. I said, the only thing you need to do now, God, is give me a husband, right? And I tell people that, you know, the enemy will deceive you when you are desperate. I wasn't desperate at the time, but the enemy will also deceive you when you are entitled, right? You don't have to be desperate, but you can be entitled. And so I felt entitled to something, and I felt like God owed me that just for being good, right? And so, yeah. So when I met husband number 2, yeah. I got to move this notebook. But when I met husband number 2, I was probably about 27 years old. I met him. His car was going down one side of the road. Mine was going down on the other side of the road. I was actually taking some members of the church home from church, and his tire popped off his car, jumped the median, and slammed into mine. And that's how I met him. And I remember when he finally came back to the vehicle and was looking at me, and I was looking at him, I was thinking to myself, right when I was looking at this man, I was like, ooh, he sure is cute. I hope he's thinking about me like I'm thinking about him, right? And this is just where I am in my mind, right? In this moment. And so anyway, long story short on that part, we exchanged numbers, of course, to take care of business. He never did replace that tire on my car. But anyway, we got in a relationship. And soon after that, after all those years and all that time of being celibate and single and serving the Lord, soon after I was in a relationship with him, I started fornicating, you know? So yeah, there was a lot of shame. There was a lot of regret in that. And so here I was 3 months into that relationship in order for me to right my wrong, because I genuinely loved him. I decided to, yeah, we need to be married, you know? And so we did get married. Soon after, we decided to have a child, and that daughter's name is Truth. But what I did not know, in my greenness, in my naivety, in my immaturity, when I got with him, I did not realize that I was marrying a drug addict. And so in that relationship, I got everything that comes along with that. He did not support the household financially in any way, shape, or form. He was sexually abusive. He was physically abusive. He was verbally abusive. He was neglectful. He was everything. He gave me every reason not to want to be in that relationship. Okay. And so we had only been married and separated on and off for about 3 years before I was done. And I remember having one last conversation with him during the year of 2008, when my mom had died from pancreatic cancer. And it was just like, I don't have any more fight in me. And so I told him, I said, you know what? I love myself too much to allow myself to be put through this anymore. I love my children too much to allow them to be raised up in this type of environment and think that this is the way it should be. And I love you too much to continue to enable you in this, because initially I was willing to live separated from him while he worked on himself, and I tell people, he had his 10-year-old daughter with him at the time. He lived with his parents, and he had, custody or possession of his 10-year-old daughter. And of course, when you look at that from the outside, oh, that's so honorable, a single man raising his children and all this kind of stuff, But that was a problem, because I didn't realize my understanding that he had that child for sure, and possibly 2 more children. And then over the course of our very short marriage, there were other children born to him. And I'll just press forward. So we were separated. My youngest daughter that we had together did not have a relationship with him. And when she was 5 years old, I got a phone call from a mutual friend of his and mine that we went to church with. And she said that he was killed. Now, I hadn't divorced him because I couldn't afford it. But he was killed in an automobile accident in Mississippi, which is where he was from, and he had moved back there. And so I went probably 2 or 3 days before I was even able to figure out how in the world am I going to tell these children that he's dead. Because even though my youngest child didn't have a memory of him, she still saw pictures. She still knew some things about him. She asked me one day before that happened, Mama, was my daddy mean to you? And I said, yeah, he was. But, that's why we just pray for him, So I had always had this mind and this hope that maybe one day, okay, if he can't be in her life at this season, maybe one day he'll be able to, they'll be able to have a relationship one day, maybe when she becomes an adult. I don't know, but I did not open that door because I knew it was a lot of toxicity in him and in his family. There's a lot of drug abuse, drug dealing in the history of his family. And so it was a lot of, there were no doors that I opened because of the toxicity and the stuff that they would bring in. And so after that, I really, really dove into my walk with the Lord. And for 11 years, I was 100% celibate, 100% single, had a few conversations, but nobody ever passed the test. Because by this time, the Lord showed me some stuff, and I told the Lord, I said, well, God, I don't, apparently I'm not too good at picking them. So I surrender this part of my life to you. And so, and it's actually that verse that you read, Romans 12, at the beginning of 2007. I prayed and asked God, I said, okay, God, I'm really surrendering this part of my life to you. I wasn't desperate for a relationship. And a mutual friend introduced me to my husband now. And when I tell you the Lord did that, the Lord did that. Okay. And so I'm trying to think, did I miss anything? because each one of those seasons in my life um, um, could be told all by itself, you know, from the childhood to the preteen to the first marriage was a whole book by itself. The second marriage was a whole book by itself. And the one that I'm in now, it's not just a book, but it is a romance novel. It is a love story. It is a blessing. It is a happily ever after type of story, you know. And so I'm thankful for where God has me now. But I know that this version of Tressa, that no, I'll put it like this, that version of Tressa had to exist in order for this version of Tressa to exist. And so, you know, there's a lot of different pieces to that puzzle, but my goodness, I mean, I'm kind of getting emotional just thinking about. Yeah.
It's beautiful.
So that's my story.
That's
Ron.
beautiful.
Mm.
I want to break down those seasons just a little bit, okay? Because you have been on quite a journey. Our journey sometimes, like we all know, you don't always understand it at the time.
Yeah.
But do you now feel that those times were training? Because since then, you have seen the fruit. You've seen the fruit of being faithful, like you said, not entitled, like you said, because I get that. I understand that. But when we're obedient like this, you do get fruit. So when you look back at it now, can you see those fruits?
Absolutely. I see the seeds that were planted along the way. I see the seeds that God used. And I can't necessarily, you know how people say they meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. There was a whole bunch of me in my own messes. So I can't put that all on them. That's one of the things that I would always say is I don't tell the story about my exes like that. Oh, he was this and he was that, he was this, because in hindsight, if I had to be honest about it, I didn't have any business in those relationships in the first place, right? Because I put that before I put my pursuit of God. But I do recognize that all things work together for the good of those that love God and have been called according to his purpose. And he called me long before I even recognized that he called me, right? He called me when I was a 12-year-old that was being put in a position to consider her grandmother or her mother and all that kind of stuff. He called me when I was married to that first husband. He was calling, and he's calling me today. So I do recognize that every bit of my story, every piece of the puzzle, every seed along the way worked out for my good because I submitted them and surrendered them to God. Because somebody can have the same story, walk down the same type of street and end up in a different place. It's about the surrender. It's about, okay, God, you can have all of this because, yeah, I don't know what I'm doing here. You know, so it was, I think that's ultimately what God did for me. Yeah, but it was definitely, you know, I think training, I believe that God always is intentional. I know he is always intentional. But again, I believe that if I had surrendered myself to God early in my life, that I would not have had to go through some of the things that I went through. But because he loved me, he allowed those things to become training for me. But that's not the journey that he had mapped out for me from the beginning.
Okay.
That's what I believe.
I love it. Okay. Now, you mentioned about your grandmom, those experiences that you went through as a teenager with your grandma. What did that do to you? And also, do you think some of the things your mom went through because your grandmother was whom she was, that maybe she experienced some of those same things and wasn't quite able to love the way that you may love your children?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with my mom. I think that my mom was my friend, okay? And my mom was a silent sufferer, okay? So there was a lot of things that I'm sure she endured that she never communicated in any shape, way, or form. You know, I knew that In my grandmother's last days, my mom was a caregiver, and my grandmother was very difficult, and she would express some things then. But I don't ever recall my mom communicating anything from her childhood that will make me believe that she experienced some of the same things. But I'm not saying that she didn't, but I'm sure that my mom experienced some things. But, sometimes it's like, if this is my norm, I don't even know that it's a dysfunction. So I think I really lean more towards that. I think that my mom probably experienced a lot of dysfunctions that, because they was normal, she didn't even identify it as something that was wrong. Okay. And then as far as me with my grandmother, for sure, I shared that she would call me stupid all the time. And those that know me best, um, I truly walk in the power of God, because on any given day, Tressa does not feel smart enough. Tressa does not feel intellectual enough. Tressa does not feel qualified enough to do anything that requires this right here. Why? Because grandmama planted that seed in my spirit years ago that, Tressa, you're stupid. And of course, hindsight, I can look back at that and say, well, the reason why she was calling me stupid was not because of what she saw in me. It was because of what she saw in herself. My grandmother had a 6th grade education, and I understood that later on, right? But of course, during that time, I just because you identify the hurt don't mean that you can just walk away from it. And so I look at this journey like it is a thorn in my flesh. I wish I could pray it away. I wish I could be affirmed enough by those that love me and value me and see me this way to say, oh, okay, you think I'm smart? You think I'm intelligent enough to do this? Then by golly, I'm going to walk in that truth. I wish it was that easy, but it's not that easy. But what I have committed myself to do is, even when I'm insecure, even when I don't feel smart, I'm going to walk forward in God's assignment anyway, because I'm not trusting in my own strength, my own intellect. So anytime that I'm given an opportunity to speak or teach or whatever, when I walk away, I don't care who pats me on my shoulder. I said, you did it again, God. Thank you for using me. Right? So that's just something that I might have to take to the grave, but I've already made up my mind that the devil, apparently God gifted me with something. Okay. And you know how the Bible says, a man's gifts make room for him. I don't have to ask for opportunities to teach or to speak, because God makes sure that those opportunities are afforded. But it's not about me, it's about him through me. So I like the idea that I get to share the story that even when I feel stupid, you won't know it because of what God is doing through me. So
Amen.
that's just a battle that I deal with, and I'll take it to the grave, but I'm gonna keep doing it even if I don't feel good about it.
Amen. Now, you did mention, and I love it, you said your mom was your friend.
Yes.
I heard that. But I kind of also heard, and I don't want to put words in your mouth or put words out there that and you tell me whether this is, so that you may have felt a little abandoned by mom. Am I hearing that too? And not abandoned on purpose, like you said, because when we don't know, if that's all you know, that's all you know. You know what I mean? So I don't think mom did anything purposely. She was from that generation too, So kind of tell me a little about that, because you know your mom better than I do.
Well, I don't know if I would use the word abandon, because I know that even every time when I lived with my grandmother, if every time I called her to complain, if I said I was ready to come home, she would have said, okay. I know that. My mom was there for her children. My mom was available. My mom was hands-on. She just didn't talk and teach a lot. I remember laughing and playing, and I love to hear my mom laugh. I laugh loud just like my mom did, But I wouldn't say she abandoned me, but I think the word that I struggled with was the fact that she did not consider me when I needed her to consider me. That
I
was the
love that.
struggle. Yeah, that was the struggle, because I recognized that she was considering the welfare of my grandmother, and that gave her a peace of mind. But I needed her to consider the welfare of her daughter, right? And at that time, I'm not going to say it was more important, because I don't think it was about being more important, but I think that maybe she felt like I was more equipped to, and not understanding how the enemy uses experiences, especially in the impressionable mind of a child,
Yes.
and how that translates and manifests. Because you pour a stupid seed into a child, what do you think you're going to get out? Now, thankfully, I was always a really good student. I was always a really good student. And maybe that was my way of resisting that, or fighting back in my own right. Because even growing up, my mom never did. I mean, as far as I can remember, outside of elementary school, I signed all my own report cards. My mom, I didn't give my report cards to my mom. She wasn't involved in my schooling like that. But I was always motivated enough to be a good student, you know? But definitely not neglected, or not abandoned or neglected. But I think that in that particular season, she didn't consider me the way I needed to be considered.
Yeah. I asked you that question for a reason, what you just said. And let me tell you why I say that. Some people out here was maybe hearing abandoned. We have to understand, again, you said something powerful before. That's why I wanted to ask that question to clarify. She was from that generation. Oftentimes, too, they were in survival mode, too.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? You being in survival mode, you got to do what you got to do. Sometimes stuff, it may hurt you, because you said going to grandmom's house. Those things, I'm sure that wasn't easy for her. Go ahead. I see you itching. Go ahead and explain that one.
You just put this in my spirit. I literally told my daughter truth the other day. I said, growing up, I was boiling some chicken to prepare a dish, right? And I said, I remember coming home and my mama boiled us some chicken, and that was the main course, boiled chicken. I was thinking it as a kid, right? I'm like, who want to eat boiled chicken? This is not a meal, right? But as a mother, right, when you work all day, you ripping and running, you come home and you trying to get these kids fed before midnight, boiled chicken, and you don't want to be on your feet. So it made me realize, like you just said, being in survival mode. And not only that, but it connected me to the fact that one of the reasons why my mom was quiet in so many different areas was because, oh, bless the Lord. Hold on. Was because she considered me. Because I'm reflecting on me being a single parent. There's parts of the struggle that I didn't give my girls. And when I was consumed, you know what happened? I got quiet. Because I'm not finna dump on my children. I want them to be children, right? And so now I'm reflecting on my mom and the times that she was quiet. I never associated with the fact that she considered me. I was saying when I was a teenager, she didn't consider me, right? The way I felt like she needed. But now when I'm looking at the big picture, my God, this woman considered me. She considered her children because she didn't want to dump onto them what she was carrying. Because that's how we do as mothers, right? I mean, in a decent mother, we don't want to give our kids all our stresses and all our worries, Okay, next, because you
said some stuff right there.
And you know what? I'm sorry.
No, go. This is your platform, honey. Go ahead.
I remember when I was at Marsalis Avenue, right? And I just had my oldest daughter, Taylor. And I used to have a really good friend, and she was married and had 3 children, and she was just so sweet, and her voice was so light, and she addressed her kids as sweetheart and honey and baby this and baby that. And I used to think to myself, I'm like, I'm not that kind of mama. I don't say sweetie and baby, and I don't sound all soft and cuddly and all that kind of stuff. And I started criticizing myself as a mother, right? And I remember talking to one sister, what is her name? Okay, I can't think of her name. And she said something. I told her, I said, I'm struggling, feeling like I'm good enough as a mother. And she says, let me tell you something. She was actually raising her grandsons. She said, you do the best you can. And I'm telling you, as simple as it was, that liberated me beyond anything. Because what I learned when she said that was that parenting is not about personality, it's about character. It's not about you sounding like somebody else. It's about the heart you have for your children. So just because you don't sound like she sounds doesn't mean that you're not a good mother, right? So it's not about personality. This is about character. This is about heart. And so anyway, that liberated me at that point, and I was fully able to walk in the kind of person that God made me and the kind of person that he was making me and the heart that he gave me for my children.
Mhm.
So I just want to drop that. Maybe that'll bless somebody. I don't know.
Well, I know that's right. You blessing us tonight. And I'm hearing three generations, maybe 4, because I don't really know before your grandmom. Her mom could have been very harsh. She was a little less harsh. You may not have seen it, but maybe so. Your mom, again, I don't know your mom, may have experienced some of that harshness, but you know what? In my mind, when you say it, your mom was a quiet storm or she was quiet because she did not want to all her unleash on you all. Maybe because, and when she was growing up, and she made a conscious decision, I am not. And then you come the next generation, 4, potentially 4, at least 3. The next generation. Okay, I'm not saying you gotta be all cuddly, but you know what? You're teaching your daughters to survive. Yeah. That yeah. Wherever knowing you who you are, your daughters probably could go anywhere. You know what? They will probably be okay because you. It's okay to call your babies baby, cuddly. That ain't I'm sorry, that's not. It's good, but you're teaching them life lessons. So each generation I'm seeing, and then they, as moms, they're gonna be the bomb. Because it's steadily going, and to keep going because you're breaking the cycle.
Yes.
So you go ahead.
That's what it's about, and the thing about it is I didn't necessarily internalize it as breaking a cycle or family dysfunction or anything like that, because I always looked at my mom. It's kind of like when people teach you, right? You hear this, that they teach you what to be and what not to be, right? Mm. And what I believe, and I tell my girls, you got to put every single body in a sifter, right? And you take what you can, that's good, and you leave the rest. And I said, you put me in a sifter too, right? And I believe that that's the way I looked at my mom. And I always say that even in her imperfections, she helped me be more perfect, because the things that she failed to do or the things that she did that I didn't appreciate, I've made a conscious decision as I've raised my children. Because like I said, my mom didn't talk to me about life. And my girls will tell you, I will turn a life lesson into out of a bag of Cheetos, okay? I talk, right? Because I didn't have that. And like you just said, I always say that too. I could send my girls out of this country and I'm gonna still have that mama concern, but I believe that they will be all right. I believe that they will be all right. And so I heard this one time, it says, it ran in my family until it ran into me. And so it's some of those mindsets that I say, yeah, I don't know if my kids will pick them up, But if they pick it up, it's not going to come from this one right here.
Amen.
It's not going to come from this one.
That's right. Now, let's talk a little about not the marriages per se. I'm not trying to get deep into marriages, but you, through those marriages, 2 different marriages you said, do you think it was the same Tressa in both marriages? And tell me about what were some of those things that you had to truly, sometimes internalize in order to get through those marriages.
Right. Well, for sure, I was not the same person because, like I said, going into marriage number 1, I was right out of high school, right? I know I had low self-esteem. And when I entered into that relationship, he exploited that. Okay. He abused that. He took advantage of that. Okay. And when that, and during early part of that relationship, the thought of him leaving me would crush me, just the thought of it, because that was that first love stuff, outside of God's will. Okay. And so when that marriage ended, no, it ended after I got for real about my relationship with God. And so as I got real with my relationship with God and he started pouring into me his identity, I no longer needed that affirmation over there because I was getting it from here, right? So I had a different kind of strength when I went into the marriage number 2. I was a different person. I only dealt with all of that for a total of 3 years. And like I said, I had that conversation with him. I love myself too much to deal with this because by that time, I knew who God says I was in him. I knew who God said I was. So it was easy for me not to embrace what he called love because I knew the love of God, right? And so, like I said, 3 years into that, I was done with, there were several children. I told you, Roz, that by the time he was funeralized, I did not attend the funeral, but when I looked at that funeral program, potentially I was under the impression that he may have had 3 children. Okay. And then I knew that he had 2 more by a young lady while I was married with him. But by the time I added up all those names, there was probably about 20 plus kids. Okay. But like I said, no, I was not the same person, because I was trying to ride in my own strength. Marriage number 1. Marriage number 2, I was right. I dealt with what I dealt with, but just for a little while, because ain't nobody got time for that. Okay. Ain't nobody got time for that. So I was a different person. My identity had been solidified in Christ Jesus. And I tried to hold on to my marriage. But, I was reading a story of Jonah. And when I tell you during that particular season, that story ministered to me in a way that nothing else could have, because what I had to communicate and realize about my second husband was that every time I allowed Jonah on the boat, the storms of life would rage. Okay. And I did the same thing the sailors were doing, right? I tried to throw off the cargo. I tried to get rid of this and get rid of that and get rid of this because I wanted to keep him in the boat. And I came to the same realization that those sailors did. If we don't get you off this boat, we are all going to perish. And when God gave me that revelation through his word, it was plain as day that I cannot leave this man on the boat, because if I leave him on the boat, he's going to perish, I'm going to perish, and my children will perish. So I had to get them off the boat. Didn't want to, but I had to.
That's powerful there. That is so powerful. One thing I understand too, I want you to elaborate on a name. Okay. Truth. Your daughter's name is Truth. When I heard that name, I said, okay, hold on. That's a unique name. You don't do that. It's a story behind that. That's not something that just comes.
Yeah.
Tell us about that name, Truth.
Well, when I was pregnant with Truth, first of all, I had a little shallowness in it because I knew I wanted to begin with a T because my name is Tressa. My oldest daughter's name is Taylor. Okay. And I knew that I wanted her middle name to have Joe in it. My middle name is Joe. My oldest daughter's name is Josette. Truth's middle name is Jomaya. Okay. But so that was just the girly part of it. But as I went through what I was going through, her father wanted to name Truth after one of his deceased family members. She was a beautiful young lady. I can't take anything away from that. But he wanted to name her after. I didn't like the name. I didn't mind the story, but I knew that I was going to be a single parent eventually. And I did not want her, and I honestly didn't see him in the picture in Truth's life. And so what I did was I started praying and asking God to help me give this child a name. And the word truth kept coming up, kept coming up, kept coming up. And when I was pregnant, I typed this up and I read it to my oldest sister, Trina, that I was living with, and it brought her to tears. And I'll read it to you. Now, I literally typed this before I had Truth. So she has the reason why I named her Truth, okay? I think it's so you just reflect on some of the things that I've gone through, been through, and then this will make sense to you, okay? So it's entitled, They Call Her Truth. Truth is more than a name. It's a story of how God's most beautiful and precious gift can come in some very unattractive packages. I considered the life that God had chosen me to deliver into this world, the stewardship, the responsibility, to the love to be given, the love to be received, the love to be modeled. Then my circumstances failed to my possibilities. The reality of the here and now was pain, disappointment, regret, and shame. The hope of possibilities was joy, peace, power, prosperity, and understanding by and by. No more shame, no more regret, no more hopelessness. The Almighty Deliverer blessed me to deliver or give birth to my deliverance. Truth saved me. Through God, she blessed me with knowledge, purpose, strength, boldness, confidence, and a reminder of God's magnificent power and love for his own. They say the truth hurts. I had to accept some very painful and disturbing realities. Circumstances beyond my control were introduced in my life by love that did not know love. I felt trapped in misery. I didn't admit nor deny the truth. I just struggled to live in my truth. Then blessings of mercy and grace flowed, and I had to accept the truth and make some extremely difficult decisions that would change the course of several lives. Scared of losing, anxious for change, tired of hurting, but determined to be happy, I accepted the ugly truth. After accepting the realities of my life, I came to understand why these realities didn't make a lot of sense to me and seemed so hard to bear at times. I had gotten away from the truth being God's word. Know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Free from misery, in hopes of a better tomorrow, free from pain, knowing that the testing of my faith produces patience, free from bondage, blessed with power to claim and proclaim, love to cover a multitude of sins, forgiveness, and a sound mind to embrace. Intellectually, the promises of God that are revealed to me in his word. Thy word is truth. My prayer is that God will change my circumstances. Keep in mind, I wrote this when I was pregnant and going through all that. My prayer is that God will change my circumstances, but if he chooses not to, I pray that he changes me. Either way, I come out on top because God is in control. Be ye transformed, not conformed. I pray for myself, my family, and those that despitefully use me. I pray that we will be blessed and prevail in spite of the tragedy of these truths. I pray for strength, power, wisdom, deliverance, patience, and long suffering. I trust the Holy Spirit to intercede and ask for anything else I need, but don't have enough sense, understanding, experience, or wisdom to ask for. I'm blessed in spite of my circumstances, and I thank God that I know that I am blessed. That's why I can live above my circumstances in spite of my circumstances. In spite of the lies that Satan has told in his efforts to destroy me, I'm still standing and more focused now than before. It was in my weakness that he has made me strong. I had to accept the truth. I had to abide in the truth, and I had to go in spite of the truth. That's why I named her Truth.
I knew it was something.
Mhm.
And you said, okay, y'all, I need y'all to hear this. She wrote that before Truth was born, when she was going through some things. Do you see how stuff get manifested here? Are y'all hearing that? And this young lady, Truth, is showing enough the truth. I know that sounds corny. My daughter probably like, Mama, that was so corny.
She hears it all the time. She hears it all the time.
But she is. I see how she has blessed you, both of your daughters. Go ahead. I don't want to take that away from you. I want you to, okay, because they're definitely a blessing. Just a beautiful thing. Okay. With that said, tell us what's next. Tell us what's next, and how can the family reach out to you? Because you got some things going on.
Well, anytime somebody asks me for a bio, I always just say that I want to be effective in whatever capacity God chooses to allow me to serve in. So if that means that I'm teaching in Bible class, then I'm all in. If it means that I've gotten an invite to speak on the Real Talk, I'm all in, or an invite to be on a conference call, I'm all in. And so that's just what God has been doing for me, through me rather, is just allowing me these opportunities to teach his word, to share my story, bits and pieces, all filtered through the spirit of his word here and there. I got like a devotional in the morning. Next month I have a few things, but that's just it. Whenever I get the invite, I go. And so as far as reaching me, reach me. I'm Tressa Joe on Facebook. I'm Tressa Joe on Instagram. I'm Tressa Joe on YouTube. I also have what I would call an inspirational blog. It's called Beyond Sea Level, SEE level. And that's just basically what it is. It's about being able to perceive life beyond what you can see, beyond sea level. And so just basically what I do is, whenever God puts something on my heart, and it's the same thing with my YouTube channel, it's nothing that I've created to blow up. It's just an outlet for me to express what God has put on my heart. And so whenever I discipline myself to document that via video or blog, that's just what I do. But yeah, Tressa Joe is most places. And so you should be able to inbox me on Facebook, TRESSAJO. But that's it.
All right. That's fine. I'm hearing an echo somewhere. I'm not sure what I'm hearing this from, but I don't know. But anyway, I may have had something on. Say it again.
I said I don't hear it on my end.
Okay, so it's probably I have something on here. I told you the social it hasn't been cooperating today, but we did what we had to do. How about that? Okay. All right, family, that is it. I mean, we just wanted you to hear her powerful story, and this is just a touch of what she can do. Okay, like I said, she's a powerful teacher. She's a powerful speaker. She's powerful, and I wouldn't say that if it didn't mean it. Okay, so you all reach out to her and allow her to bless you all, and also if you want her on your platform, because any platform I've seen her on, she's definitely a blessing. What I want you all to do, the ones that are on Zoom, I want you to stay right there, and the ones that are Facebook Live, y'all make it a good one.